Stop explaining yourself. It has never given you what you thought it would. Stop chasing the perfect words. There aren't any. Every explanation changes something, not their opinion, your position. Watch yourself the next time someone gets you wrong. You explain. They hesitate. You explain again. A little more, a little longer. Then something invisible happens. You stop defending the truth and start defending yourself. That's the moment everything shifts, not in their mind, in yours. Most people never notice the shift. They only notice they're exhausted. Here's the question nobody asks. What exactly changes the moment you feel compelled to explain yourself? Because something always does. And it isn't the other person's opinion. It's your relationship with your own identity. That's why one explanation is never enough. Once your identity enters the conversation, every misunderstanding feels like a threat. Every silence feels like rejection. Every disagreement feels personal. So you explain again and again, until you mistake emotional dependence for honesty. The Stoics saw this pattern long before anyone called it psychology. They discovered something that sounds almost impossible. The moment you stop trying to control how you're understood, people lose the ability to control how you feel. But why does that happen? Because there's one mistake almost everyone makes, and once you see it, you'll never explain yourself the same way again. You think you're trying to change their mind. You're not. You're trying to stop the feeling their misunderstanding created inside you. That's why explanations almost never end after the first sentence. They grow. You add context. You explain your intentions, then your motives, then your past, then everything they never even asked about. Why? Because you're no longer explaining the situation. You're trying to erase a feeling, and feelings don't disappear because your explanation got better. They disappear because your identity stops depending on the outcome. That's why silence feels unbearable. Silence leaves the misunderstanding untouched. Your mind can't tolerate that. So it whispers, just one more explanation. But have you noticed something? There is always one more explanation. It never ends. Because the addiction was never words, it was certainty. You wanted certainty that they finally saw you correctly. Certainty that they weren't judging you. Certainty that you hadn't lost their respect. That's the craving, not communication. Certainty. Nearly 2,000 years ago, Epictetus captured the answer in a single sentence. Make the best use of what is in your power, and take the rest as it happens. Most people hear that and think he's talking about circumstances. He isn't. He's talking about this moment, the moment you mistake another person's opinion for something you can control. Think about what happens every time you explain yourself. You're not controlling your character. You're trying to control their perception. And that's a battle you can never completely win. Not because you're weak, because their mind has never belonged to you. The tragedy isn't that people misunderstand you. The tragedy is believing your peace should wait until they don't. Here's where this becomes uncomfortable. Not every misunderstanding is an accident. Some misunderstandings survive because they serve someone. Watch what happens when you're constantly defending yourself. Your attention turns inward. You become busy proving, busy clarifying, busy repairing. And while you're occupied defending yourself, you stop asking questions about them. That's the real cost. Your focus quietly changes sides. Some people don't need to defeat you. They only need to keep you explaining, because the person constantly defending themselves rarely has time to examine the person making the accusations. That's why certain conversations never move forward. Every answer creates another question. Every clarification demands another clarification, not because understanding is impossible, but because the conversation was never designed to end. If you've lived through that, I'm curious. Who do you find yourself explaining yourself to most often? Family? Friends? A partner? People at work? Just one word in the comments. I have a feeling we'll all notice the same pattern. And once you see that pattern, the next part becomes impossible to ignore. Every explanation leaves a mark, not just on you, on the relationship, because every time you rush to defend yourself, you're teaching people something. Not with your words, with your behavior. You're teaching them. If you question me long enough, I'll question myself first. Think about how dangerous that becomes. They don't have to understand you. They only have to keep you explaining. And the longer you defend your character, the less time you spend protecting it. That's why some conversations leave you exhausted. You weren't having a conversation. You were carrying the burden of proving your own reality. The strange part, most people never notice when the balance changes. One person asks the questions, the other person supplies the evidence. One person stays calm, the other person works harder and harder, trying to be believed. Somewhere in that exchange, your peace quietly became the price of their approval. Marcus Aurelius refused to pay that price. Not because people always agreed with him, they didn't. Not because people always judged him fairly, they didn't. But because he understood something most of us forget. You cannot govern another person's mind. You can only govern your own. The moment you confuse those two, you lose both. There's one lie almost everyone believes. If they finally understood me, everything would change. Would it? Think about the people who've crossed your boundaries. Did they misunderstand them or ignore them? Think about the people who underestimated your value. Did they fail to see it or refuse to admit it? Those are not the same thing. Understanding and respect have never been the same thing. Someone can understand exactly who you are and still choose what benefits them. That's why chasing understanding can become a lifelong distraction. You're trying to solve the wrong problem. Marcus Aurelius wrote something remarkable. If anyone can refute me, show me I'm making a mistake or looking at things from the wrong perspective, I'll gladly change. For I seek the truth, by which no one was ever truly harmed. Notice what he doesn't say. He doesn't say, I need everyone to agree with me. He says, show me the truth. That's a completely different life. One person searches for approval, the other searches for truth. One becomes emotionally dependent on agreement. The other becomes emotionally free even in disagreement. Ask yourself, which one have you been chasing? If this changed the way you think about being misunderstood, there's probably someone who needs to hear it too. Send them this video, and if you found value in this conversation, leaving a like helps this message reach people who are still trapped in the same cycle. Because we're only halfway through. There's one final shift that changes everything, and most people never make it. So what changes? When you stop trying to be understood, not what most people think, you don't become colder, you become quieter. Not because you have nothing to say, because you no longer feel responsible for managing someone else's opinion. Watch the people who are genuinely at peace. They don't rush to correct every misunderstanding. They don't panic when someone gets them wrong. They don't measure every conversation by whether they felt understood. They leave room for other people to think whatever they want. That's not weakness, that's trust. Trust that your character can survive another person's misunderstanding. Think about how much of your life has been spent trying to control conversations that ended years ago, replaying them, rewriting them, wishing you had said one more thing, one better thing. But what if peace begins the moment you stop asking your past for a different ending? That's what emotional freedom actually looks like. Fewer words, less urgency, more presence. Your actions begin speaking because your identity no longer needs constant translation. You stop choosing persuasion. You start choosing peace. And something unexpected happens. The people who were always willing to understand you still do. The people who never wanted to still don't. The only thing that changes is that your peace no longer depends on either one. Maybe this was never about being understood. Maybe that's the story you've been telling yourself, because it hurt less than asking a harder question. Why do I need everyone else to confirm who I already know I am? Long before the language of psychology existed, the Bible asked a question that reaches the same struggle. Am I now seeking the approval of man or of God? Or am I trying to please man? If I was still trying to please man, I would not be a servant of Christ. Whether you read that as a spiritual truth or simply as a question about where your identity comes from, the challenge is the same. Someone else cannot become the final authority over your worth. The moment they do, you'll spend your life chasing explanations instead of living your convictions. Maybe the goal was never to make everyone understand you. Maybe the goal was to become someone who no longer needed everyone to. Because the strongest people aren't the ones who always find the right words. They're the ones who stop believing their worth rises or falls with whether those words are accepted. So before you leave, don't ask yourself whether people will understand you after this video. Ask yourself something harder. Who's been deciding your identity all this time? Hold on to that question. Because the next step isn't learning how to explain yourself better. It's learning how to stay completely calm when people deliberately test your peace. That's exactly what the video on your screen is about. If you're serious about mastering this way of thinking, subscribe and work through the playlist from the beginning. Each lesson builds on the last, and over time, you'll stop changing other people's minds and start changing your own.